The rip of fabric cut through the smoky tavern like a gunshot. Under the yellow haze of buzzing lights, Naomi Carter stood frozen at the center of O'Malley's bar, her back suddenly exposed. Gasps rippled through the room as eyes locked on the tattoo inked across her dark skin, a bold insignia that stopped hardened bikers in their tracks. The Delta Force emblem, surrounded by lightning bolts and dog tags, was not decoration. It was a declaration. Across from her, Duke Rourke, the towering leader of the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club, had meant to humiliate her. His knife still trembled in his hand, his grin faltering as confusion spread across his scarred face. For years, Duke had ruled this place with fear squeezing protection money out of the tavern's owner. Patrick O'Malley, a Vietnam veteran too old to fight back, but too proud to abandon his bar. On this night, though, his intimidation met an unexpected wall. 30 pairs of eyes watched in silence, their breath caught in their throats, as realization spread. Naomi Carter wasn't just a quiet bartender with haunted eyes. She was something else entirely, a soldier forged in deserts half a world away, a survivor who had tried to bury her scars beneath long sleeves and silence. But the moment her shirt tore, the truth could no longer be hidden. And in that truth lay a power no biker gang had ever faced, the calm fury of a warrior who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. 6 months before that night, Naomi Carter had slipped quietly into O'Malley's bar, asking for work, with nothing more than a steady gaze and a rusum she never bothered to explain. Patrick O'Malley, a grizzled veteran of Vietnam, had taken one look at her posture, back to the wall, eyes tracking every exit, and hired her without a single question. He'd seen that silence before. Some stories weren't told in words. They were carved into scars. By day, the tavern looked ordinary, scratched wooden tables, a jukebox, with only 20 songs beer that came in mugs older than the bar itself. But to Naomi, the small room above the bar became a fortress, a place where she could breathe without the constant hum of gunfire in her ears. Still, her body never forgot. Each night she woke at 3:17 a.m., reaching for the phantom weight of her rifle, her breath shallow as memories of burning metal and sand pressed against her chest. She wore long sleeves even in the stifling heat, hiding the language her skin spoke. The customers quickly learned that she wasn't one for chatter. She communicated in nods, in the efficient slice of a lime, in the way she held a knife knot as a bartender, but as someone who had once needed blades for survival. That girls got ghosts, O'Malley had muttered to his wife. And she had nodded because some ghosts still wore uniforms long after the war was over. Every Friday night, the roar of Harley engines shattered the bar's fragile calm. That was when the Iron Vultures arrived. Conversations died, couples vanished, and O'Malley, hands trembling, slid an envelope across the counter, $500, like clockwork tribute to a kingdom he never chose. Naomi watched from the shadows, her jaw tight, her eyes cold. She knew the ritual well. Survival sometimes meant silence. Sometimes it meant letting the enemy believe you were invisible. But invisibility had a cost, and Naomi's scars whispered that the day would come when silence was no longer enough. The night that tested Naomi's silence came just a week before everything unraveled. She had been stepping out with the trash when she heard the sound, a cry cut short by a boot to the ribs. Across the street, Jimmy Lou, the gentle shopkeeper, who sold phone chargers and second-hand radios, lay curled on the sidewalk, while Duke Rourke and his Iron Vultures circled like hyenas. Duke's laughter echoed as he kicked again, each blow, deliberate, meant to remind the neighborhood who owned it. His men filmed on their phones, their voices dripping with cruel amusement. Naomi's muscles coiled, instincts screaming for her to cross that street. Every nerve remembered Kandahar, remembered running into fire instead of away. Her hands flexed at her sides, ready to strike. But then, just as quickly, she forced herself still. To intervene meant exposure, meant questions she couldn't afford to answer. The shame of turning away burned deeper than any scar. That night she returned to her room above the bar, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the faded photograph tucked in her wallet, squad mates who never came home. She whispered their names into the darkness, feeling the weight of yet another ghost. When she bent down to pick up a broken bottle behind the counter later that evening, her collar shifted, revealing the jagged scar running from her jaw to her ear, fragment of shrapnel, a memory etched into flesh. Patrick O'Malley noticed, but said nothing. Their eyes met for a second, soldier to soldier, and he gave a small nod. They both carried wounds the world preferred not to see. So when the rumble of motorcycles shook the tavern the following Friday, Naomi's hands trembled as she arranged the bottles, but her eyes were steady. She met O'Malley's gaze across the bar. 2 veterans, 2 survivors bracing for the storm. The air itself seemed to hum with danger, metallic and sharp. Something was coming. And deep inside, Naomi knew her time of invisibility was over. The storm broke that Friday night. 8 Harleys thundered into the parking lot, their chrome pipes spitting fire into the quiet neighborhood. Duke Rourke swaggered through the door first, 6 feet of arrogance wrapped in leather and denim. He kicked the tavern door wide open, letting it slam against the wall as silence swallowed the room. Behind him, Tommy Bulldog Martinez and the rest of the Iron Vultures spread out, turning O'Malley's cozy bar into a cage. Duke's knuckles cracked like breaking bones as he strutted to the center. "Well, well, Patrick," he sneered, dragging a chair around and straddling it like a throne. "Business looks good tonight. Means you've been holding out on me." His voice dripped cruelty born of too many nights where no one dared answer back. Patrick O'Malley. His lip still scarred from last week's. Humiliation slid an envelope across the bar. 500, same as always? His voice shook, but his hands did not. Duke let the silence linger, then leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Agreements change. From now on, it's 800. The number landed like a noose tightening. Patrick's protest was cut short by a vicious slap that snapped his head sideways. Bottles rattled on the shelves as blood trickled down his chin. Laughter rose from the bikers, harsh and metallic. Naomi Carter moved before she thought her bar towel in hand, as she bent to mop up the beer Duke had deliberately spilled. She positioned her body between the old soldier and his tormentor, every gesture precise, controlled. Duke noticed. His boot came down hard on her hand, pinning it to the floor. "What's your name, girl?" he growled. His lips twisting around a slur, he almost spat but swallowed. Patrick tried to rise, but Duke shoved him back again, glass shattering behind the bar. Naomi stood slowly, her jaw tight, her eyes steady as steel. For the first time in months, her voice rang clear, sharp, as a command barked on a battlefield. "That's not how you solve problems." The entire tavern froze. And for the first time, Duke Rourke realized the quiet woman behind the counter was not prey at all. She was a soldier waiting for her moment. Duke Rourke's grin widened, as if Naomi's defiance were fuel to his fire. "Did you just tell me how to run my business?" he barked, his voice echoing off the walls. The Iron Vultures closed in, forming a circle, their hands hovering near knives and pistols. But Naomi Carter didn't flinch. She stood tall, eyes locked on Duke, with the kind of calm only someone who had already stared death in the face could muster. He lunged like a bull, 200 pounds of muscle and rage. Naomi pivoted her body, moving with the precision of training that had been burned into her bones. His weight carried him into a table that splintered beneath the impact. Shouts erupted, but when Duke charged again, Naomi didn't dodge. She absorbed the momentum, redirected an elbow to his chest, a knee to his leg's nerve cluster. Duke staggered, breathless, confused. "Little girl," he spat, grabbing at her shirt with iron fists. Fabric tore with a sound that silenced the room. Time slowed as harsh yellow light spilled across Naomi's bare back. What the crowd saw wasn't fragility, it was a banner of war. The tattoo sprawled across her skin, the Delta Force insignia sword and lightning bolts framed by dog tags and bold lettering. Beneath it, etched forever, read SGT, Naomi Carter, Purple Heart, Operation Enduring Freedom. The tavern went dead quiet. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. 30 faces stared, processing what stood before them. Not a bartender, not a victim, but an elite warrior who had bled for her country. Duke's grip faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came. Across the room, Tommy Bulldog Martinez himself once, a soldier, turned pale. He whispered hoarsely, "Holy hell, she's Delta." The words rippled like a shockwave. Naomi stood motionless, her back straight, her breathing steady. She no longer needed to hide. The truth had spoken for her, and the weight of it was heavier than any blade. For the first time, fear didn't belong to Naomi. It belonged to Duke Rourke. The weight of silence pressed down, until even Duke Rourke's bravado began to crack. His pride, however, was louder than his fear. "Purple Heart, huh?" he sneered, circling Naomi like a hyena. "That means you got hurt. Means you failed." His words were venom, meant to draw blood without a blade. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't strike back. Not yet. Her eyes stayed locked on his, steady as stone. "You know nothing about sacrifice," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every flag-draped coffin she had saluted. "You know nothing about holding lives in your hands, about making choices that haunt you forever." The room shifted. Patrons who had once kept their heads down began to lift their chins. An older man in the corner, his Desert Storm cap frayed with years, spoke up, his voice hoarse with conviction. "You're talking to a hero, son." Others found courage in that moment. A woman near the bar stood, anger flashing in her eyes. "She served this country while you were out selling poison to kids." Murmurs of agreement spread like sparks catching dry grass. Even Tommy Bulldog Martinez shifted uneasily, his military tattoos suddenly feeling like accusations burned into his skin. For the first time, the iron vulture's wall of intimidation began to crack. Duke's face purpled with rage. With a snarl, he drew a serrated knife, its steel glinting under the tavern lights. "I don't care what uniform she wore," he spat. "In here, I'm the only authority that matters." But Naomi had already moved. Muscle memory took over, swift and precise. She deflected his wrist, forcing his fingers to spasm open. The knife clattered to the floor. With one fluid motion, she flipped Duke onto his back, her knee pressing into his spine. Not enough to break, but enough to control. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, her voice calm, commanding absolute. "But I will protect those I care about. That's what soldiers do." The bar erupted not with fear, but with resolve. For the first time in years, Murphy's Tavern had found its backbone. Duke Rourke writhed beneath Naomi's control hold, spitting curses that no longer carried the weight they once did. The knife lay out of reach, kicked farther away by Tommy Bulldog Martinez himself. His voice was low but steady. "Stay down, Duke. You've lost." That simple declaration shifted the entire room. One by one, patrons who had once cowered rose to their feet. The Desert Storm veteran straightened his shoulders. A young woman, her brother serving overseas, moved closer to stand beside Naomi. Within moments, 30 people formed a wall between the iron vultures and the woman who had just dismantled their leader, Patrick. Blood still at the corner of his lip, pushed himself upright with a new strength. "This is our bar," he said firmly, his voice echoing in the silence. "And she's one of us." The bikers looked at each other, suddenly uncertain, their usual tactics of intimidation collapsing under the weight of community. Even the jukebox seemed to hum with anticipation, waiting for the final blow. Then the front doors banged open. Detective Sarah Lynn stormed in with 4 uniformed officers, her hand on her weapon. She had spent 18 months chasing the iron vultures, her cases always crumbling when terrified witnesses recanted. But tonight was different. He pulled a knife on her. O'Malley shouted immediately. "We all saw it." Voices rose in chorus, overlapping, confirming. "He's been extorting for years," the veteran added. "500 a month, maybe more." All eyes turned when Tommy stepped forward. His betrayal hit Duke like another blow to the ribs. "I'm done," Tommy announced. "Detective Ill'll tell you everything, the drug deals, the protection racket, where the books are. All of it." 2 more bikers peeled away, their loyalty dissolving under the harsh light of truth. Sarah's body camera captured every word, every face, while Murphy's security footage rolled behind the bar. For the first time in a long time, Duke Rourke realized he wasn't feared anymore. He was surrounded, recorded, and utterly defeated. By dawn, the footage was everywhere. A shaky cell phone video of Naomi Carter disarming Duke Rourke and holding him down played across news channels and flooded social media feeds. The headline blazed, "Female Delta Force Veteran Defends Local Bar from Racist Biker." Within hours, veterans groups, civil rights advocates, and women's organizations had rallied around her. Murphy's Tavern, once a rundown refuge, was suddenly a symbol. Donations poured in, reporters camped outside, and for the first time in years, Patrick O'Malley held his head high as he unlocked the doors to his bar. Yet Naomi didn't bask in the spotlight. Instead, she stood on the tavern's steps, in a plain black tank top, her tattoo visible for all to see. Cameras zoomed in as she spoke, her voice steady but unpolished. "For 6 months I hid who I was because I thought my scars made me weak," she said. "But strength isn't about hiding. It's about standing up for what's right even when your hands shake." The clip went viral, 10 million views in just 3 days. Across the country, struggling veterans reached out saying Naomi's courage had given them permission to stop hiding. Organizations called senators wanted meetings, but Naomi kept tending bar every Thursday night. Sometimes, she told one interviewer, the most powerful thing you can do is show up, scars and all. Meanwhile, the ripple effect spread. Duke sat in federal prison, his empire shattered, his family disowning him. The Iron Vultures disbanded, many of their former members turning to honest work. Tommy Bulldog Martinez opened an auto shop, hiring veterans who needed a second chance. And Murphy's Tavern transformed. What had been a dusty corner bar became a gathering place for those haunted by wars no one talked about. Naomi led support groups, shared her story, and listened to others. Week by week, the weight of silence lifted from the room. What began with one torn shirt and a single tattoo had grown into something bigger. A movement built on scars, courage, and the promise that no one fights alone. 3 months later, Naomi Carter stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the U.S. Capitol, her Delta Force tattoo visible beneath her blazer. Facing the Armed Services Committee, she spoke not with anger, but with the calm authority of someone who had already survived her worst battles. Every day she began her voice, steady. 22 veterans take their own lives. Not because they are weak, but because they are fighting alone. We don't need more statistics. We need safe spaces, community, and the courage to show our scars. Behind her sat Patrick O'Malley, Tommy Martinez, and 6 veterans whose lives had been changed at Murphy's Tavern. Senators leaned forward, listening with rare focus as Naomi laid out her vision, local gathering places across the nation, modeled after the bar that had become a sanctuary. The proposal passed unanimously. As Naomi flew home, she knew the fight wasn't over, but the battlefield had changed. Her war was no longer in deserts overseas, but in the hearts and minds of those still struggling in silence. At Murphy's that Thursday night, she poured drinks, listened, and reminded every soul who walked through the door, "You are not alone." Real strength is not about hiding pain, it's about sharing it, so others know they don't have to suffer in silence. Scars don't make us weak. They prove we've endured and can still stand tall. If Naomi's story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found courage in your darkest moments? And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell, because together we can keep spreading stories of resilience and hope.